Hello everyone and welcome to class number 6 of nuk309, and from this class onwards we're going to spend quite a lot of time in Maya and also in SpeedTree, which is another 3D software specializes in plants. And people ask me, why do you spend time teaching 3D stuff in a Nuke or in a compositing or in a 2D course? And I have several answers for that. The first one is that in this particular course, we really need to do some 3D work to get the shot going and to make it work. And who's going to do it for us? Now, this is not just a joke. It actually represents a situation that's, I think, characteristic for a lot of VFX artists nowadays. Some artists work in the big companies, and in the big companies, the system is more of a conveyor belt type system where each person specializes in one specific task, does the job, and then hands it over to the next person. So a modeler will model, then he will hand the model to someone else who'll do the textures, and so forth, until it goes finally to the compositor, usually at the end of the chain. Now, there's nothing wrong with this system, and the big advantage of it is that each person becomes, or each artist becomes, really specialists in their own task. But the truth is that a lot of people either work on their own or work in smaller companies where there is no possibility of using this conveyor belt kind of workflow. So people end up wearing different hats and doing a lot of different tasks. And to be able to work in a company like this, or even work completely independently on your own, you really need to be able to go through the entire process of the VFX work and not just specialize in one specific task. Now, beyond that, of course, it's always good to expand your capabilities and your knowledge. It will generally make you a better visual effect artist. Another thing is that nowadays, really, you can't separate 2D from 3D. I mean, Nuke has got much stronger 3D capabilities now. You do so much in 3D in Nuke. And besides, you know, when you work in a 3D software like Maya, the end result is a 2D render, or even when you watch the screen, it's just 2D. So, you know, the division is a bit artificial. Really, it's the same thing. Now, another very important thing is that lighting and comp are interdependent. Basically, every lighter has to know comp, and every comper has to know lighting, because they both deal with light, and light is color. And as I always say, the majority of what we do in comp is color, and this is the same as lighting. So I really think that every comper needs to know lighting and probably be a pretty strong lighter. Finally, you know, it's just fun. So with that, let's get started. So before we go into Maya and start working on the 3D, obviously we need to export the camera from Nuke. We also want to export the temp geo that we created, so that we can have some kind of reference that will help us building the actual balcony in Maya. And it's a good idea to also export our comp at the stage that it is, so that we can use it as a background in Maya for reference, mainly for lighting. For exporting the actual comp, just want to render out a version, but you really want to do JPEGs and not XRs, because you don't want them to be heavy in Maya. You want them to play quickly. And also, there's no point in exporting the full 3K. We can export half-res as well. So for that, you just need to add another reformat node and just set it to scale 0.5. So now we're 1440 by 810. And that's fine, because as long as we keep the same aspect ratio, that will work in Maya. And in your write node, you probably want to write it into your elements folder, and in there you want to choose sRGB, of course, JPEG, and you can lower the quality to like 0.75. Again, we don't need high quality, we just need some kind of reference. And of course, you don't need to render the whole thing. Again, we want to render from the same frame that where we decided we see the background, which will be frame 99. Now, the next thing to export is the camera. We can go back to our original 3D setup where we have it there. And of course, we need a write geo node. Now, one thing to remember is that the write geo is not going to consider the time offset that we put on the camera. So really we need to export the camera starting at frame 1001 like it was originally set up. So the best way to deal with this is simply to do all the 3D work in Maya starting at frame 1001, and then when we bring back the renders, all we need to do is offset them back to frame 1. That's not a big deal. Of course, we need to put the camera into a scene, so let's just create a scene just for that and connect to the camera and write geo, and now you simply give it a path and click execute. You want to use FBX. I recommend using FBX. I like to export the camera separate from any other geo just to be on the safe side, and again I'm using FBX because it's tried and tested. It's true that you can use Alembic too, ABC, but for cameras I usually stick to FBX just because I know it works. Alright, so the camera is exported, and now we want to export our little mock-up 3D scene, basically to give us some reference in Maya. So it's already connected to a scene, so all you need to do is do another write geo, and again I'll prefer to use FBX. Give it a path, execute, and that's all. Now that we've got the camera, the temp geo, and a low-res render of our comp at this stage, we can go to Maya. So now in Maya, the first thing you want to do probably is create a project folder. If you go to File, Project Window, you click New. I usually give it the name of the shot I'm working on, so it will be SH30. Then you browse to your shot folder, and in 3D Maya, the way we set it up in the first class, right in there you'll put your project, you click Accept, and that will create a bunch of folders for you to put stuff in. You don't have to use that procedure, but I actually like using the Maya default project setup. Just makes things more organized and easier to manage. So after you do that, you just want to go to Set Project and make sure you are using that project you created, and from now on anything you create here will by default go to that project. I also like to enable the outliner always on the side. That's useful. And now we can bring in the geo and the camera. So we go to import, and I put both the geo and the camera in assets. So first let's bring in the nuke scene, and there it is. Let's now change our view to shaded, and this is our temp geo. Now let's bring in the camera. And here's the camera. It's really small, it's hard to see. We want to make it larger, so let's make it larger. But you see that as soon as I start browsing the timeline, it goes back to its original scale, and that's probably because it has a keyframe on the scale. So let's go to the channel box, and as you can see, the scale XY are animated even though there's nothing happening there. So what we can do is select all three of these, right click, and go to break connections. Now we can make the camera as big as we want, and it's still not moving, but that's because, as you remember, we exported starting in frame 1001. So let's set the frame range 1001 to 1300, and now you see all the keyframes of the camera, a keyframe on every frame. And again, since we are really starting only at frame 99, let's set this to 1099, and this will be our work range for everything we do in Maya. Everything before 99 we're not concerned with because we don't see the background yet. Now we want to set the correct resolution for rendering and for viewing. So let's go to the render globals. We can already change it to Arnold renderer, since that's what we're going to use later on. For now, it doesn't really matter. We want to change, let's change the renderable camera to our camera. Let's change the resolution to our resolution, which will be 2880 by 1620. That's okay. Now we can turn on view resolution gate here, and if we look through the camera now, Well, that looks nice. Now that we have this set up, we can set up a background plane to view our shot behind. So let's go back to the attribute editor and let's select our camera. And in the camera properties, let's go to environment. We want to create an image plane. And for this image plane, first of all, we want to look at it only through camera. We don't want to have it there around when we look through another view like perspective. And let's bring in what we rendered, which I saved in the elements. Here's our pre-comp low-res. Bring in the first frame. And of course, we want to use image sequence. Now, it's not showing anything because we need to offset it because we rendered it as 99 to 300, but actually our frame range here is plus 1000. So we want to offset it for some weird reason that I don't understand. The offset in Maya works in reverse. So instead of offsetting it 1000 frames forward, you need to do minus 1000. I really don't know why, but now it works. And if we play, that's nice. Let's make sure our resolution gate is on. Now it's on, and we see it in the proper resolution and framing. And we're basically set up to start working. Obviously, you see that our geo goes in front of her where it really should go behind her, but this is not something we can do in Maya. That will be done in comp, of course. For now, seeing the background help us also visualize the scale, but mainly we're going to use that to fill the general lighting. So it's good to have it there. All right, we're all set to start modeling. Let's switch back to perspective view. And one thing I like to do as a general setup in your create, because we're really going to create a bunch of polygon primitives, I like to turn off interactive creation. I don't like dragging around in the viewport to create a cube or a plane. I like it to just be dropped by default at the origin. Always makes things easier, but this is really up to you. And of course, we want to create a floor first thing, so let's create a plane. And we can simply scale it to match the size of the plane we have there. We can also turn off the resolution gate for now. So this is pretty much it already. Doesn't have to match exactly. As long as we cover the same area, we know that we have a floor in the view. We're not going to have a hole in the floor. Now, in terms of position in Y, in height, it should be 0. So that is good. And now we can already turn off our nuke plane. We don't need that. So this is going to be our floor. We might as well name it floor. Now let's replace those edges, and we really want to do something that's a little lower because most of the railing will be this metal railing. We just want a base there. Let's create a cube, and let's set the width to 1000, so we want it really long, and let's set height and depth to about 15. So you see it's a bit smaller. Let's just make sure that we're putting it on the ground, and it's okay to intersect a little bit. And let's just push it to the edge of the plane, more or less. Again, accuracy doesn't have to be precise here because we only care about what we see through the camera. We're not going to use this model for anything other, so we're not going to look at it from any different angle than what we have in the camera. And we can hide this piece already. And let's move this all the way here. Let's hide this piece too. And when you get to the point where you want to really put it close to the floor, it's going to be a little hard to do it like this. You can click insert and move your pivot point to a closer place. Click insert again and simply push it to here. Now I think we want to push our floor a little bit closer to her on the side. than it was when we set up the nuke temp. So let's do it right now. We've got this set up. Let's call it base. And now we can simply duplicate it and rotate it on the Y. Let's rotate on the Y 90 degrees. And it's already almost falling in place since we have the pivot right there. Something like this. And again, it's okay if they intersect. Now, what we did want to do, that can help with the lighting just a little bit, is just break those corners so they're not totally sharp. Do a little bevel there. We can select this cube and go to Edge and select the top two edges and go to Edit Mesh, Bevel, and we want to open the parameters just to set them. And we want to do a really small, tiny bevel, so let's set this to 0.1, and segments 3 would be enough, and apply, and we got just a little kind of corner bevel there. We can go back to object mode, and you can see that you got a little bit of rim there, which could show with some highlight on the shader. We can do the same on this cube, or we can just delete and again just duplicate this one again and rotate it on the Y. And now we can just set it up correctly. Now, this intersecting area and the way the bevels work is not, I'd say, might not get approved by top modelers. But again, we're going to see this corner passing by with motion blur and defocus. So when you build this stuff and you build for a shot that you already know and are familiar with, you can save a lot of unneeded work, as opposed to somebody who puts all the work on modeling before even knowing how and it's going to be shot and from which camera, which angle. So we're done with the base. Let's move on to the railing. We want to create one fence pole. So again, let's create a cube. And this time, we want the cube to be, let's say, we want it smaller. So let's say 3 by 3. And the height, let's set it to 60. We got this skinny little pole there. We want to put that exactly on the center there, so we might want to change to top view. And will also help to switch to wireframe. And let's just put that in the middle. Again, I'm not using any precise tools, but I don't think it's necessary. We can eyeball those things. Let's go back to perspective and shaded and just put that in the concrete. If you want to put a little bevel on it too, you can do that. That's always good. So select the 4 edges. And we can just use the same bevel setting that we had before. And again, that's just adding a little bit of, breaking the corners. And that's good because we're going to want to make this feeling more like painted metal. So now that we have one, we have to create lots more. And we can just use the duplicate special and give it an offset. So let's do that. Let's go to Edit. Duplicate special, and we want to create instances because in case we change something, we can change one and have it apply to all the others. We can estimate the total number. Well, I don't know, but you want to create more than you need and then just delete. And we want to translate on the X, so let's set this to 0, and on the X we'll set a -80. So it's going to create an offset of 80. And let's apply, and that's cool. We probably have a bit more than we need. Yeah, we can delete this. It's not going to be seen by the camera, so no problem there. Good. So we've got that, and we might as well do the same for the other side. So again, we select the center one, and this time duplicate special. We want to keep the same distance and number, but instead of on the X, we want to do it on the Z. And it's going to be positive Z, so we'll set it to 80. Duplicate special, and let's just go ahead and delete whatever is not needed there. And just to check it out, it's a good idea to go back to your camera, make sure you have a resolution gate set on, and go back to frame 99. And yeah, you see how fast all this side goes by. So really, we don't need to go over the top in terms of modeling. The part where we see more is going to be here, where we're going to see mainly the fence. Okay, that's good. Let's finish the fence. Let's go back to perspective, but maybe before we do that, we want to put a little bit of order here because we have all these cubes. So that is our floor. Let's call it floor right here. So we have the name in here. Then we have the two bases, and again, let's just call it on the base level base, and we'll call this base 2. And now we have all these, and we can simply group them all together, and we'll call this group railing poles. So that is much more organized right now. So let's finish up the railing by putting the top piece in there. So we want an elongated piece like this, just lower. So let's create another cube, and we want to set the cube to be, well, about 1000 elongated. Height, let's put it to 2, and depth, let's put to 6. That's good, and we probably want to go into top view to adjust the position. So there it is right now. Let's put it at the center of the poles, just like this. And now we can use insert to move the pivot point to the edge to help us align it, and that should be it. We can now even move the pivot to be exactly over the pole. And in perspective view, we just want to put it right over these. Let's look in shaded, see that they don't come through. Let's lift it just a little bit more here. And we want to do some bevel on this. Now we want this to be more rounded. This is where you're supposed to put your hands on the railing. So again, we'll choose the top two edges. But this time we're going to do a bit of a larger bevel. So go back to Edit Mesh, to the bevel parameters, and let's change this to, let's say, 0.4, and add a bit more segments, let's say 4. And yeah, that makes it more rounded. Yeah, it will give a little bit of a highlight kick right there, which is good. And now we can select this, duplicate, and then rotate again on the Y 90 degrees. And let's just go over the corner there. Just want to align these two better. And again, this kind of intersecting placement is not going to be approved by a serious modeling supervisor. But for what we need, this is not going to create any problem. And you know what? Nobody's going to see it. At this point, you probably want to save what we have so far. So we finished the basic model. In the next class, we're going to add more detail to it, some pots and plants that will break up the monotony, will make the balcony feel a bit more homey, and we'll also add some detail, color, and shadows, and so forth. But at this stage, it's always a good idea to render out a test frame or a couple of test frames and bring them into the comp so you can see the whole thing in context. And since we don't have any shaders, any textures, and any lighting set up yet, the best way to render out the geo so it doesn't look flat is to use an AO pass, an ambient occlusion pass. And we'll need that pass anyway for our final work on the renders. It's always useful to have an ambient occlusion pass. So for this, of course, we're going to use Arnold. And I just want to say a few words about Arnold. Everybody will tell you that it's a great render, and that's true. It's fast and it's very capable. The one thing I really like about Arnold above everything else is the fact that it's actually very simple and straightforward to use. So for people like me who are not Maya experts and don't have a PhD in writing shaders, it's extremely helpful and encouraging. And for compers who want to build some stuff in 3D or render out or light stuff, again, it's very easy to learn, at least the basic setup things before you go into the fine details. And I gotta say thank you to my friend and colleague Vadim Turchin, who introduced me to Arnold and gave me a crash course on it. And really, in a couple of hours, he taught me everything I need to know about it. So Arnold is really a step forward in terms of renderers, high-quality renderers, just for the fact that it's actually very easy to understand and set up. And as an example, let's just go and set up an ambient occlusion pass. So first, let's switch back to our camera view. And now we want to enable the channel and layer box. And we want to go to our render layers and create a new render layer that will be only for ambient occlusion. So we can click that button here to create a new layer. And let's rename it AO. And now we want to select all our geo. You see there's nothing here yet. And right-click and add selected objects. Now, these do have some kind of shader. It's a default Maya shader. We want to override it anyway, even when we assign later on Arnold shaders. So we want to create an override on the shader. So right-click over the layer, go to Overrides, create new material override, and what we want to use is the AI utility or the Arnold utility shader. And let's open the attribute editor, and this is the shader. And this shader is great because it gives you all kinds of different options to create different things, from wireframe render to special mats and so forth. We just want the ambient occlusion, which is at the top, and that's about it. Now our render settings are already set. We can click the render button. Now one thing you might want to do in the options, you want to set your test resolution to 50%. So we're really rendering half res right now, and we don't need more than that at this stage. That will be plenty. And you can already see the ambient occlusion geo here. What we don't want is to see the background. So for this, we need to select our camera again, go into the image plane, click the arrow right here, and in display mode, just change it to none. And that will remove that. And if we render again, and let's make sure we're rendering this layer and not the base layer, we get the, and you see that it's extremely fast. Ambient occlusion in Arnold is very, very fast, extremely useful. Let's again choose a frame where we want to render. Let's say we want to see that corner actually. So that, let's select frame 140 or 1140, but in our comp, of course, it's 140. It's going to go really quick. And now we just want to go and save it. It will go by default to the images folder, and we can save it as a test. We can save it as a 16-bit TIFF. It will include the alpha in there. So I already saved one, so I'm just overriding this one. And now we can go into Nuke and check it out. Back in our comp in Nuke, this is where the background comes in, and of course we want to put it right over the background panorama that we have. Let's bring this in, and we can put it just before the vector blur. Or you know what? Let's put it after the vector blur. I have a feeling that for the 3D we're going to use Arnold's own motion blur because it will give us much more accurate results. As you remember, in previous classes we decided not to use the Nuke 3D motion blur, and there were two reasons. First, because the vector blur is faster, we have more control over it in comp, and also because what we're rendering in terms of the background is just a single image mapped on a cylinder, so there is no real 3D depth in there. On the other hand, what we render out of Arnold is full 3D, so we might as well use the motion blur that Arnold gives us. But for now, we don't have motion blur. Let's just put it right after the motion blur and before the distortion. We'll put an over node here, and it's coming out wrong, of course, because we used half res. We just need to reformat this, so it's going to blow it up. And this is it. You can see your geo. You can see how it works with the background. Let's go ahead and render out a different frame to see how that looks. So I went back to Maya and quickly rendered frame 120. We can go to that frame right here, and I just overwrote the previous render. So really what we need to do is double click on it and reload in Nuke, and that gives us that frame, and we can watch the whole thing. Let's look at the bottom of the comp, and you can see the floor, the ground. The AO really helps you kind of visualize what's going on. Of course, everything is just white. We'll take care of it. One thing I am seeing is that we might have a bit too much of a distance between our room here, or the entrance to the balcony, and the edge of the balcony. We can certainly go back to Maya and just shift the model a little bit down. But you see why it's good to, even at the early stage, to start bringing stuff into your comp and looking at it in context. So now let's go back to Maya and to our perspective view, and we probably just want to take the whole thing and just very slightly move it down. And let's do another render of frame 120 right now. And again, I'm saving it over the previous one. And now we can go back to Nuke and reload this frame. And you see we just brought the railing a little bit closer, and I think that will work fine. So now that we're back in Maya, we want to start thinking about shading, texturing, and lighting. And the question is, where do we want to create color textures or bump textures, and where do we want to go with a simple shader? And I'm thinking that a lot of this stuff goes by pretty quickly and is out of focus and kind of motion blurred, and really when we settle down with the camera, we see just this railing. Now this railing will be painted metal, so we might get by just using a shader, an appropriate setting on the shader. I think the same applies to these pieces, which are basically painted stucco white or light gray materials, or maybe concrete. The one piece that definitely needs texture is the floor, since we're talking about a tiled floor. So we can create textures in Photoshop, but I like using Nuke for textures as well. Let's do just that. So I'm back in Nuke now, and I've brought one of those JPEG photos that we got for the actual balcony. And this is the kind of floor we want to recreate. And we're going to do a type of these plants and pots later on. But for now, let's just create a simple texture that will hold up for the floor. So here is a simple tiled texture, and you can find lots of these anywhere on the internet for free, or get a library. It's fine. And here is a simple grunge image, and again, these you can find anywhere or just shoot your own. And what we want to do is, instead of using this and tile it in Maya, which will create a very mechanical kind of tile, we want to actually create the tile here in Nuke and create a large texture so that we can break it up using the grunge. So this specific image already comes at a very good resolution, at 2800. So all we want to do is create some tiling, and we can use the Nuke tile node, and let's do 8 on each side, and let's also turn on mirror for both. So we have already a nice tiled version. It's just looking a bit repetitive and mechanical. What we want to do is break it out with a grunge. Let's put the grunge over it, and of course that's blowing up the colors. Instead of using a simple over in the merge, let's change to soft light, and that's a nice trick you might want to use for this type of work, and that adds all this nice detail there, that it's not repeated and not tiled. And this is basically ready, and it's not looking too far from the original floor. So that's a good start. You want to write it out probably just as a JPEG image. You don't need much more than that. And if you're doing that, you might as well create a bump map for the floor, just to help get maybe some highlights and some definition there. It's not a very deep bump. Now, if you look at the different channels, the red, green, and blue, the blue has too much of the grunge in there. That will go into the bump and might break the floor too much. What we basically want is those edges between the tiles. So it looks like the green channel would be the good choice. So you just want to add a reshuffle node in here. You know what? And we don't even need to take the grunge in that, because really we just want that. Let's look again at the different channels. Yeah, the blue has these artifacts in there which we don't really want. So let's stick to the green. So in our shuffle node, let's just grab the green for everything. And you can write this out, and that will be a black and white image ready to be used for tiles. So this is it. In the next class, we're going to bring this texture, and we're going to create shaders for all the other parts, set up the lighting, and we'll have the balcony pretty much ready to go. And the next step after that would be to add details by means of adding different pots and putting plants in there. And we might also, for the end part of the shot where we're centered on her, create one plant that we can put there that also has some wind animation to give everything a bit more life. So we'll meet all next week. Bye bye.